Man stared at the massive hide in front of him. He ran his hand gently across the surface, then plucked a single hair from it. Turning to the king, he confidently said, "This is the hide of a sow," but the king shook his head. Incorrect. Another man stepped forward with a magnifying glass. He examined the hide for a long time, furrowing his brow. Then he hesitantly guessed, "It's the hide of the forest god." Again, the king was disappointed, and the princess let out a sigh of relief, because if anyone guessed correctly, she'd be forced to marry them. Suddenly, a rugged-looking barbarian strode forward. He leaned in, took a deep sniff of the hide, and casually declared, "It's flea skin." The king's eyes went wide in disbelief. He'd never imagined anyone would actually get it right, but the barbarian had nailed it. You see, several months earlier, as the princess was performing music in the palace, a flea suddenly hopped out of the king's hand. It bounced playfully across his palm, making the king burst into laughter. He was so amused, he stopped paying attention to his daughter's performance. Fascinated, the king left the hall immediately, carrying the flea back to his study. There, he pricked his finger with a pen and watched in awe as the tiny flea drank his blood. Once it had its fill, the king placed it gently into a small box. With careful care and daily feedings, the flea grew to the size of a thumb in just a few days. Wanting it to grow even faster, the king began feeding it prime cuts of steak. Before long, the flea was the size of a puppy. Delighted by his strange but adorable pet, the king couldn't have been more proud. Time passed, and one day, the royal physician was urgently summoned. Before he could even ask what was wrong, the king pulled him into the study. The physician blinked in confusion, staring at the massive flea beside the king. At the king's insistence, he pressed his stethoscope to the flea, but before any treatment could begin, the flea suddenly stopped breathing. It had eaten far too much and died of overeating. The king, devastated, held it in his arms and wept bitterly. After all, he'd raised this flea from birth. The next day, the king had its hide removed and issued a royal decree. Anyone who could correctly guess the origin of the hide would win the princess's hand in marriage. No one expected a wild barbarian to come in, take one sniff, and guess it right on the spot. The princess, horrified, fled the throne room. She ran to the top of the palace tower, ready to leap off. The king followed and tried to reason with her. "As king, I must honor my word. Even my own daughter is no exception." Left with no choice, the princess accepted her fate. And so, dragged away by the barbarian, she left behind the only home she had ever known.